June 18th, 2020, Munich, Germany, 8:47 a.m. Marcus Braun walks into the Wirecard headquarters wearing his usual black turtleneck. He is 50 years old, Austrian, chief executive of Germany's most valuable technology company. His stock is worth 100 euros a share. His personal net worth is over 1 billion euros. His company is a member of the DAX, the German equivalent of the Dow Jones, alongside BMW, Siemens, and Lehman. At the other end of the building, his auditors from Ernst & Young are waiting. They're going to tell him that 1.9 billion euros of cash that Wirecard has reported on his balance sheet for the last 2 years does not exist. It never existed. It was never in the Philippines. It was never in escrow. The bank accounts listed on his company's own audited financials are not real. Certificates proving those accounts exist are forgeries. The signatures on those forgeries belong to people who do not work at those banks. Within 7 days, Wirecard will file for insolvency. 24 billion euros in market value will evaporate. The company will be the first member of the DAX to go bankrupt in German history. Marcus Braun will be arrested. His chief operating officer, a 40-year-old Austrian named Jan Marsalek, will vanish. And in the months that follow, every Western intelligence service will quietly confirm what a few investigators had already begun to suspect. The COO of Germany's biggest fintech company was a Russian intelligence asset. Wirecard wasn't just a fraud. Wirecard was an intelligence operation. And the 1.9 billion euros that disappeared was the cover story. This is how one man built a Russian spy network inside Germany's stock market and escaped to Moscow before anyone figured out he was never really in Munich. Marcus Braun was born in Vienna in 1969. He grew up middle class, studied computer science at the Vienna University of Technology, and at 25 joined Austrian consulting firm KPMG as an IT advisor. By most accounts, he was not unusually talented. He was unusually patient. He spent 8 years at KPMG learning exactly one thing: how to read a company's balance sheet and how a company's balance sheet could be made to tell a story. In 2002, he was approached by a small, struggling Munich-based payment processor that had almost gone bankrupt during the dot-com crash. It was called Wirecard. The company had 7 employees. Its main business was processing credit card payments for German online pornography and gambling websites. Marcus Braun became CEO. He was 32 years old. He kept the pornography, he kept the gambling, he added crypto trading, offshore forex, and online poker. Margins were enormous. A normal payment processor earns roughly 0.3% on a transaction. Wirecard earned 4 times that. In 2005, Wirecard was listed on the Frankfurt Stock Exchange. Braun started wearing the black turtleneck, a deliberate echo of Steve Jobs. He told journalists he was building Germany's first global fintech champion. German media agreed. Der Spiegel put him on its cover. Handelsblatt called him the new face of the German economy. Between 2005 and 2015, Wirecard stock rose from €1 to €50. In 2018, Wirecard replaced Commerzbank, one of Germany's oldest banks, on the DAX. The DAX is Germany's top 30 companies by market capitalization. It is national prestige. Wirecard was now officially more valuable than Deutsche Bank. The German public was proud. German regulators were proud. German politicians stopped asking questions. In early 2015, a London-based Financial Times journalist named Dan McCrum received a strange phone call from a short seller in Australia. "Do you want to see something interesting?" the short seller asked. McCrum spent the next 5 years pulling at the thread. Here is what he found. Wirecard reported that roughly half of its total revenue came from 3 mysterious third-party partners, one in Dubai, one in the Philippines, one in Singapore. These partners processed transactions on Wirecard's behalf in countries where Wirecard itself wasn't licensed to operate. The arrangement was legal. It was also entirely unverifiable. Every year, Ernst & Young Wirecard's auditors signed off on these third-party partner accounts. Every year, Wirecard claimed billions in revenue from those accounts. McCrum's first FT article ran in April 2015. He suggested cautiously that Wirecard's third-party partner revenue might not be real. Wirecard's response was immediate and devastating. German financial regulator BaFin opened a criminal investigation, not against Wirecard, against the Financial Times. BaFin accused McCrum and his colleagues of market manipulation. Prosecutors opened files. German newspapers wrote editorials about foreign attacks on a German national champion. BaFin issued an emergency order. It became illegal to short Wirecard stock in Germany for 2 months. BaFin is regulated by Germany's finance ministry. The finance minister in 2019 was Olaf Scholz. Scholz is, today, the Chancellor of Germany. He was asked repeatedly whether BaFin's defense of Wirecard had gone too far. He said it had not. McCrum kept publishing. The short sellers kept short. Wirecard stock kept climbing. In September 2018, it hit an all-time high of 191 euros a share. The company was valued at 24 billion euros. Marcus Braun was a paper billionaire. John Marsalek, his chief operating officer, was worth roughly 200 million euros. Nobody yet understood what John Marsalek actually did with his money. If Marcus Braun was Wirecard's face, Jan Marsalek was its shadow. Marsalek joined Wirecard in 2000 at age 20 as a junior technical manager. By 2010, he was chief operating officer. He rented a large villa in one of Munich's most expensive neighborhoods. He hosted dinners there several times a month. The guest list, reconstructed from later investigations, included former officials from multiple Western and Middle Eastern intelligence services, sanctioned arms dealers, executives from UAE-linked sovereign funds, and officers of the Russian GRU. Marsalek was not a spy himself in the traditional sense. He was a broker. He introduced people. He arranged meetings. He quietly funded a mercenary operation in Libya through a Wirecard subsidiary. The mercenaries were used to reinforce one side of the Libyan civil war. The payments were processed legally, formally as Wirecard payment processing fees. He attempted to acquire a large quantity of captured Syrian military-grade chemical weapons precursor with the stated intention of developing a rapid response decontamination product for private security buyers. German investigators will later cite this transaction as evidence that Marsalek had been operating with the backing of a foreign hostile state. All of this was happening while Wirecard stock was hitting all-time highs and while Marcus Braun was being photographed on the cover of Forbes Europe in a black turtleneck. The question is why Wirecard tolerated Jan Marsalek's other life. The answer, after the fact, is horrifying in its simplicity. Marsalek's other life was not other. It was the reason the financial fraud worked. Here is how the 1.9 billion euros came to exist on paper and why nobody could definitively prove it did not. Wirecard's three mysterious third-party partners were not independent companies. They were paper entities operated by individuals in Marsalek's network. Every quarter, they reported to Wirecard that they had processed enormous volumes of transactions on Wirecard's behalf. Every quarter, those reported revenues were added to Wirecard's consolidated financial statements. Cash from those revenues was deposited, nominally, in two escrow accounts, one at the Bank of the Philippine Islands, one at BDO Unibank, both based in Manila. The escrow agent holding the money was a Philippine lawyer. Every year, that escrow agent issued a signed confirmation letter stating the account balance. Ernst & Young, as the auditor, accepted the confirmation letter. This is the heart of the loophole. German audit law required auditors to verify a company's reported cash balances, but the law did not require them to verify those balances directly with the holding bank. It allowed them to accept a confirmation letter from a third-party escrow agent. Ernst & Young had never once, in 10 years of auditing Wirecard, made an independent phone call to the Bank of the Philippine Islands to verify the account. When the Financial Times finally managed to do it in 2019, the bank's compliance officer told them that no Wirecard account had ever existed at the bank. Same answer came from BDO Unibank. The escrow agent's confirmation letters were fabricated. The Philippine lawyer who had signed them was, as it turned out, an old friend of Jan Marsalek. Money had never been anywhere. Every year, the reported revenues were invented. The phantom revenues were accumulated in a phantom cash account. What made it legal, right up to the last minute, was that nobody ever asked the question the right way. BaFin didn't ask, Ernst & Young didn't ask, the DAX committee that added Wirecard to Germany's top index didn't ask. In October 2019, the Financial Times published documents showing for the first time, in black and white, that Wirecard's reported Singapore subsidiary had inflated its revenue by over 50%. Germany's second largest pension fund, DECA, forced Wirecard to accept a special forensic audit by KPMG. KPMG auditors arrived at Wirecard headquarters in October 2019. By April 2020, they had concluded that they could not verify the existence of roughly half of Wirecard's reported assets. The 18th of June 2020, Ernst & Young formally refused to sign off on Wirecard's 2019 annual report. Marcus Braun held an emergency press conference. His hands were shaking. He said Wirecard was the victim of an elaborate fraud. On June 19, Braun resigned as CEO. On June 22, he was arrested at Munich police headquarters and charged with fraud, market manipulation, and embezzlement. On June 25, Wirecard filed for insolvency in Munich. The stock, which had been worth 100 euros a share 7 days earlier, was worth €1.30 by the end of the week. It was delisted from the DAX, becoming the first and only DAX component in Germany's history to declare bankruptcy. 24 billion euros in shareholder value evaporated in 8 trading days. Somewhere between June 18 and June 19 inches, the exact window in which Marcus Braun was holding emergency meetings with his auditors, Jan Marsalek, the chief operating officer, the man who knew where every fabricated confirmation letter had come from, disappeared. On the 18th of June 2020, Jan Marsalek was placed on suspended leave by Wirecard's board. On June 19, a private jet registered to an Austrian shell company took off from a small airfield in Bad Vöslau, Austria, just outside Vienna. According to flight records, it flew directly to Minsk, Belarus. Jan Marsalek was on board. Minsk, according to Western intelligence reports, Marsalek was transported by car across the border into Russia. He was taken to Moscow. He has not been seen outside of Russia since. In the months that followed, Dutch journalist Der Spiegel and the Austrian newspaper Der Standard began publishing the other half of the story, the one that had been running in parallel for years, inside Marsalek's Munich villa. Jan Marsalek, it became clear, had been a Russian intelligence asset since at least 2014. His mercenary operation in Libya had been coordinated with Russian GRU officers. FBI, the CIA, German intelligence, and Dutch intelligence all reached the same conclusion, quietly, over the next 2 years. Wirecard had not just had a corrupt COO. Wirecard had been penetrated, and Marsalek had used a publicly listed German fintech company with real offices, real revenue, and real regulatory cover as an operating platform for Russian intelligence operations across 4 continents. The 1.9 billion euro fraud was, from one perspective, just bookkeeping. From another, it was the fuel. Wirecard wasn't a fraud masquerading as a company. Wirecard was an intelligence operation masquerading as a fraud. In December 2022, Marcus Braun's trial opened in Munich. He faces up to 15 years in prison. The trial is ongoing. He denies everything. Ernst & Young settled a damages claim with Wirecard shareholders for 10 million euros in 2024, a tiny fraction of the 24 billion lost. The firm was banned from new German audit contracts for 2 years. Fin was restructured. Its director, Felix Hufeld, resigned in disgrace. The German finance ministry, then led by Olaf Scholz, now chancellor, faced a parliamentary investigation. Scholz testified under oath. He denied personal knowledge of Wirecard's fraud. The investigation found no criminal wrongdoing on his part. The opposition called the finding politically convenient. The Philippine lawyer who issued the fabricated escrow confirmation letters was never formally charged. He died in Manila not long after the fraud was exposed. Macron published a book about his 5-year investigation. It is called Money Men. It is the definitive account. Jan Marsalek is still, at the time of this recording, a fugitive. His last confirmed location is Moscow. German prosecutors have issued an international arrest warrant. Interpol has him on the red notice list. Russia has declined every request. Reporting from multiple European intelligence sources in 2024 indicated that Marsalek is, at the time of this recording, living under a new identity in Moscow, reportedly advising Russian-linked private mercenary operations across Africa and the Middle East. 1.9 billion euros has not been recovered. It was never anywhere. It never existed. The Wirecard loophole is simple to explain and almost impossible to fix. German audit law allowed auditors to accept third-party confirmation letters as proof of foreign subsidiary cash. The law assumed the third party would be honest. The third party was chosen by the company being audited. Every incentive in the system pointed toward not asking the question that would collapse the company. Germany changed the law in 2021. The loophole closed. The 24 billion euros in shareholder money is still gone. Jan Marsalek is still in Moscow and somewhere inside the Russian intelligence services. The details of how a DAX-listed German company was turned into a covert funding vehicle for operations across 4 continents is a case study being taught to the next generation of operators. If you want to know how modern frauds actually work, not as cartoon villainy, but as patient institutional exploitation of the blind spots, every regulator agrees not to look at. Wirecard is the template. This is the loophole files. Every Monday, one scheme that moved billions and stayed legal. If you made it this far, hit subscribe. Next Monday, we're covering the one where a civil engineer bought 12,000 pudding cups and legally walked away with 1.25 million frequent flyer miles. See you then.